What's fascinating about comics is the medium itself, but also what's under the hood. Last week, I was invited to a convention called FANFAIRE in New York City, where I was a guest at a panel that I shared with the amazing FRED VAN LENTE. Fred is a veteran writer. He wrote for every publisher in the universe or so, and we have this kind of thing in common, that we love the mechanics of comics. And this panel, which was very well attended, was called Start Your Story Engines. I recorded that panel, and I'm very happy to share it with you now. I'm your host, Fabrice Sapolsky. This is Fab Fridays. Hit it. One more thing. Before we start, I want to address something very important. Between late March and early April, our industry suffered tremendous losses. Great talents that are irreplaceable, of course, and that we're mourning as a collective. And me personally, I knew these three people, and for two of them, I had the pleasure of working with them. So please, let's take a minute to remember their legacy. Thank you.
I absolutely have no idea what you're going to do if you're going to talk and I'm just going to listen to you.
No. I mean, I could do that if you wanted me to.
No,
I'm really good at it. Just
I know.
continuously going and going and going.
Yeah.
But let's have it be more of a dialogue.
Let me
I
just
think.
say first that we have more audience than our last panel together.
Yes, that's true. This is much more people than we had at our last panel in Chicago. So
Maybe you guys introduce yourselves.
yes, well, there's slides for that, man.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to bogart the slides. So my name's Fred. I've written a lot of comics, including Amazing Spider-Man, Incredible Hercules. I've written lots and lots and lots and lots of comics. Valiant stuff, Dynamite, Action Philosophers, which is down in the gym if you want to check that out. My partner in crime, Ryan Dunleavy. I also teach comics. I have an online course at Domestika. If you stick around to the end of the presentation, you'll get a code, a discount on that class, discount code, because I'm trying to trick you to stay through the whole thing. So I'm just going to be totally transparent about this stuff. And
this is me. I'm Fabrice Sapolsky. I'm a publisher, writer, artist, designer, letterer. I'm doing about everything you can do in this business. I started my career as a comic book journalist 28 years ago in my home country in France, and since 2008 I've been a comic book creator. My first published comic was with Marvel Comics. It's called Spider-Man Noir, a character that I created for Marvel. And
who's your scene across the Spider-Verse and into the Spider-Verse? So that's the Spider-Man.
Well, that's a version of it.
Don't get him started.
Yes, don't get me started. And after that, I ventured into creator-owned comics. Creator-owned led to create my own company. I've also been an editor for as long as I've been in this business, and I worked for many, many companies in the US and in France as an editor. So I have both hats, editor and creator. And that's been most of my life. And my company is FairSquare Comics, and we have a table downstairs if you want to see our books. We're publishing about 20 books a year, so 20 graphic novels a year. And we're independent, and we're the only immigrant and minority-owned comic book company in America.
Excellent. Oh, so that's
me. Oh, yeah, that's us.
cool. So look for that down there. Cool. So I was talking to folks here at the school about what maybe we could talk about, and I settled upon this concept that people seem to really dig, which is this concept of the story engine. How many of you guys want to be writers, or are writers for that matter? Cool. Artists, maybe?
I write on the side.
Hey, we all do. Trust me. We do.
You have to start somewhere.
Exactly. Side, in the back. It's all the same. Trust me. So, have any of you heard of this concept, story engine, bandied about? It's a big term in television specifically, but I was going to talk about how it applies to comics and really anything that's continuous, right? A story engine is the elements of your premise which allow you to continue producing complex units of story over an extended period of time, which I know sounds like VCR instructions, but I'm going to give you some concrete.
Who knows what a VCR is?
That's right. Oh, yeah, who knows what VCR is? That's right. But there's basically two types of these kinds of story engines. One is for an ongoing series. An ongoing series just doesn't end, right? There's plenty of manga, for example, manga series where the creator says they know what the ending is, but for some reason it just kind of keeps going. So you believe them. But then there's an old TV show.
Later,
yeah, exactly. It's still going strong until it becomes unprofitable. John Wells, who created a TV show called ER, said a show like ER, which is basically every episode is with various problems in the hospital. You have a beginning, which is the first episode of the pilot, and then it's all middle, right? There's no end. Generally speaking, all stories are about characters trying to achieve a goal, and when that goal is achieved, the story is over. So I make a distinction, and I should point out these are descriptions, not definitions. So I've, in fact, have not really encountered anyone other than me who thinks this way, but this is to facilitate thought, not to constrain it. So take these definitions in the spirit in which they're provided. Episodic series have story engines in which the protagonists have a very open-ended goal that generate many different stories of a similar nature, like I work in a hospital. Serialized story have story engines that are powered by a single goal, and each episode is a mini story about that character trying to get closer and closer to that goal. A good example of that would be a graphic novel, if it is serialized. Now, do you serialize your graphic novels for research?
No,
You generally
none
bring them out
anymore.
as one thing?
And it's a very interesting topic because today's market doesn't favor serialization of independent comics.
Sure.
And
Why do you think that is?
You're faced with a reality that if you're an independent creator or independent publisher, your work has to be ordered by the stores. So you have to have a level of confidence from the stores, and you have a level of, you have to be a non-commodity to them so that they are going to order your books so that they know that they will be able to sell it. So at the end of the day, it's very simple. You present your books through the distributors, and you talk to the retailers. They say they love your work, and in the end, they order Madman. That's the problem. The problem is that you're in a market where you have legacy brands that are very, very well established, and that have basically a monopoly on that market. And you can extend that to like 6 or 7 publishers that are more or less doing well on that market. But for the rest of us, you realize that except if you are doing a Kickstarter before, or if you have a convention presence that allows you to, get the word out and make yourself known, it is very hard to get through those gates. And as such, doing a graphic novel is very much the only way you can put a book out. Now, your graphic novels, and mine actually, are in chapters.
Right.
So they're kind of like built the same way
Yeah.
as the original traditional comic book model. They just appear as a whole story.
Yeah, in the 19th century, when a lot of like the most famous novels in the 19th century came out, like Les Miserables or Count of Monte Cristo.
Let me go. Les Miserables.
Thank. That's why I got the French guy here to tell my Victor Hugo pronunciations. Most of Charles Dickens stuff, like A Tale of Two Cities, all that stuff was originally serialized, right, in newspapers or something like that. So serialization of novels used to be the primary way you got novels, and then you'd bring them all together into a single book. And in fact, the same way if you're buying Spider-Man Monthly or this guy, Superman Monthly, then those are later collected into graphic novels. That's kind of how originally prose used to work, at least in the English French-speaking world.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's still, even in the Japanese world, like if you look
is that right?
Yeah, if you look at how manga is structured, you have this big
Shonen Jump,
magazine,
and you have the magazines.
Shonen Jump that is weekly, where you have chapters, and the chapters are like our issues. So they're 20 pages, about 20 pages, and they appear every week, not every month like in the US, but every week. And then they're collected, and this collected edition becomes the manga that we see on shelves.
To talk about it. We see how many languages I can mispronounce during this talk. Yeah. So we'll talk about that separately. But speaking specifically of episodic story engines, a very popular episodic story engine is what I call cops and robbers. Basically, anything involving law enforcement. Let's face it, Superman may dress kind of unusually for a police officer, but he kind of acts like a world cop. You know, there's an inexhaustible supply of wrongs for Superman to right, and every day brings new crimes to the police and district attorneys of Law and Order to deal with, whatever Law and Order franchise you may be talking about. Most episodic series tend to be situation driven. You know, Star Trek is about a bunch of people who live and work in a spaceship, right? The Sopranos is about a bunch of people who work in the mafia or related to those people. Friends is just a bunch of people living in two apartments in Manhattan. And so those situations, Interesting Jobs, which is sort of which Cops and Robbers is kinds of a subdivision, is its own very popular subdivision of episodic series. So serialized stories, which is what I would describe more novelistic storytelling, they tend to be goal driven. So like Breaking Bad, which is really the fun fact about Breaking Bad historically is that it was basically what made Netflix, believe it or not. It was what inspired Netflix to start making it its own shows. How many here remembers when Netflix used to send DVDs to your house, like the discs, right? So their most popular title by far was Breaking Bad. Like people could not get enough of that. And that's when they realized people weren't just, getting Breaking Bad and letting it sit on there, collecting dust on their machines for weeks. They were binging it. They were ordering each of the new discs of each of the new seasons. And so that's when they realized, we should make our own shows, right? So Breaking Bad is other than being a TV show a lot of people love, I don't. But that's okay. Yeah, not my favorite, but it doesn't matter what Fabrice and I think in this particular instance. It's very popular, and so that's really where streaming and binging comes from. Is it all can be traced back to Breaking Bad, which even though each episode of Breaking Bad sort of you can see as a single unit, I would argue not really. Each season kind of has its own beginning, middle, and end, and sort of tells its own story, and Sopranos kind of started that really to a certain degree. There were other stuff in the 90s like X-Files, any X-Files fans here, that had season-long stories. The J. Michael Straczynski, the space station show, Babylon 5 did a lot of that, as did its sort of...
but it's funny because you're mixing like cable television
and syndicated,
and syndicated, and networks. And they have different realities. So how do you reconcile that in your system?
Oh, I don't bother. Again, this is not a definitional system. This is sort of a descriptive system. Okay. So I'm more interested in what are the characters trying to do. In the syndicated shows, I'm not sure if I brought up a network show in this context yet, but the syndicated shows.
X-Files.
Fair point. And that's actually X-Files is a great example, because what the X-Files would do, they would have episodes that were like called Monster of the Week episodes, but then there'd also be what were called mythology episodes, which moved along the storyline of them trying to figure out what the cigarette smoking man was, and all that stuff. And then later in the 90s, there used to be a lot more like historical slides here. Explained all this, so I'm just kind of automatically doing the spiel anyway, even though I don't have the slides to support them. So the X-Files was really the show that kind of broke a lot of ground on this, because it started out as a Monster of the Week show, but then you had the mythology shows that basically carried along the larger storyline of the show, which you could also do with the network model. The other big difference, right, is that you have 25 episodes. It's a lot of episodes.
Yeah.
A lot of episodes.
fillers.
A lot of fillers, yeah. A lot of monsters.
A lot of monsters.
In a lot of weeks, yeah. But this isn't obviously, this kind of goal-oriented stuff isn't just restricted to TV. A new innovation, I would say, the primary reason the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the most successful movie franchise of all time is they had this purple guy looking for these magic rocks, right? And that, even though they only gave you a little dollop of that each movie until the Avengers two-parter movies, that was still, in many ways, what kept driving people back to the theaters. And when they finally paid off that storyline, it seems to be fairly obvious they're struggling a little bit trying to figure out what to follow that up with.
But it's funny that you're saying this, because we all know, you and I know, maybe the audience doesn't know, that comics evolved to that point.
Exactly.
But they were not originally that.
Correct.
They were more of a monster of the week or villain of
Episodic,
the week, of the month, actually. Episodes like the first Superman, the first Detective Comics, the first Justice Leagues, they were one-offs. And they were not really building, a sense of continuity only appeared later.
Correct.
In the 60s.
Yes,
So
innovated by Marvel. So it sort of makes sense that Marvel would do it. So basically the movie people in Marvel Studios took what Marvel Comics did in the 60s, which was to-be-continued stories, interconnected storylines. The Thor shows up in Spider-Man's book, Spider-Man shows up in the Fantastic Four. So, of course, while this is a lot of fun, the cynical profit motivation behind it was, let's try and get you to buy all the comics, right? That's the idea, just like they want you to go to all the movies. So yeah, exactly. The comics are also another medium that started as episodic and moved serialized, like TV. Like, they've attempted many, many times to replicate the MCU formula. Most obviously the DC extended universe, but that they've had a lot of problems with that. There was a Monsters universe, the Dark Universe. Remember the Mummy, the Tom Cruise Mummy movie? No one else does either. Because it just didn't work, Yeah, so in each goal, MacGuffin is a director named Alfred Hitchcock who came up with this term, which is useful, I find, in teaching. Like I said, I teach a lot because the MacGuffin is just the thing everybody wants. It comes from this movie he did called North by Northwest, where this guy, Cary Grant, right? Cary Grant in this movie is after this microdot that a bunch of spies are after, and he's on a train. If you wonder why it's called North by Northwest, where it goes from New York to North Dakota, so they're going North by Northwest. And so the microdot is at the MacGuffin. People love that movie, but if you ask them what was on the microdot, most of them would be like, the secret plans. Like I don't even know what was on the microdot.
it's the thing.
It's the thing that everybody's after.
Yes.
Hitchcock said it was the thing that the characters care about, that the audience doesn't care about. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the audience does
It's funny
care
because,
a lot.
even in Star Wars, there's
Right.
MacGuffin, like the plans of the Death Star,
Right.
but no one sees them until the very end.
Yeah.
And you don't really see them.
Right.
They're on the screen, but it's blurred. So it's like, it keeps happening even in modern day movies.
Yeah.
And it keeps happening again and again. So
Yeah. I mean, the Infinity Stones are
Yeah.
a glorified
MacGuffin.
MacGuffin. It's the same thing. It's what everybody wants, or alternately in the Avenger series, what you're trying to keep the villain from getting, right? So the other thing about this is that any premise can be treated in either an episodic or a serialized form. Bunch of people stranded on a desert island. It's had two very famous TV shows associated with it. One of them is a comedy, Gilligan's Island, where it's supposed to be hilarious, and then Lost, where it's like the afterlife or something. Sorry, was that a spoiler? If you guys not
the interesting thing about Lost is that
Go ahead.
The interesting thing about Lost is that it inspired a lot of writers, including myself, because the story structure was so different.
Right.
Because you always moving back and forth in time and space without even knowing where you were. And it was a very interesting narration process. And a lot of us have been very influenced in comics, because in comics, this is the perfect medium to implement something just like Lost is.
Now in Lost, a show which I have to admit I've only seen the last 10 minutes of the last episode.
What?
I know, which is sort of why I'm like, what? They're in a church? What's happening?
Yeah. I was a hardcore fan.
Well, then weren't a lot of those? So is it sort of an X-File structure in that you have stories that sort of move along the main plot line, but then every once in a while there are flashbacks of the characters lives before they went out on the plane, right?
Like you have a situation, and then the situation you get clues to the situation with those flashbacks, and you explore the characters through those flashbacks.
Right.
And each episode is centered on one character.
Right.
So, of course, it kind of like expands the horizon of your thing, and you understand that it's a bigger problem than you initially thought. Like, just like people lost stranded on an island and their plane was taken down, or you don't know what happened. Then you realize that there's a whole sci-fi plot behind that.
Right.
There's a whole organization behind that. And yes, it kind of like leans into the X-File territory without the horror elements, but with the sci-fi elements. And it ends up being this very interesting plot that has so many traps and drawers, and you never know where you are. So you're very confused at the end of the show.
And if I may, there's a lot of MacGuffins along the way too.
Oh my God, yeah!
There's
You
the
can't
hatch
you
and the
can't count
boat.
them. Like everything is a MacGuffin. You have like websites.
Well, there's like
that
a
have-
monster at least in the
Yeah.
first season.
Oh yeah,
right?
there's the smoke monster. Yeah, I mean there's the second episode. I think it was the smoke monster. So yeah, but you have all these kind of clues that are like in every character's past, and it's again for comics. It was such a huge inspiration. It's like what we've been doing in comics is now on television. That means we can take it back to comics.
Right. And yeah, and a bunch of people wrote for Lost, like David Lindelof. They ended up
Absolutely,
writing
yes.
comics as well to a certain degree.
Damon, but also like Mark Guggenheim, Brian Vaughn.
Oh, did Mark work on Lost?
Yeah,
I don't know that.
yeah, he did. Jeff Lowe.
Sure.
There were a lot of comic people.
That's cool. I had no idea. So yeah, so if you want to make your own engine to make your own stories, you set it up in a very simple way, which is your main character who is living or doing a thing has to achieve a goal or find a MacGuffin, and is opposed by whatevs, physics. I'm on an island, there's an ocean, and I don't have a boat, so I can't get off, I'm a mafia guy, I have to worry about the FBI and the cops and other mafia guys trying to kill me. That kind of stuff. And so, in the previous version of these slides, I explained all these things, but now we're sort of left with these bullet points. Like the most, and a lot of TV shows tell you what their story engine is at the very beginning of the show, right? Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise, blah, blah, blah. That, they're just telling you what the story engine of the show is in the opening sequence, And so, like I said, I teach a lot, and so I use a bunch of writers when I teach, and one of them is David Mamet, who's a screenwriter and a playwright, and he's a little dogmatic about stuff. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he says a very useful thing, which is that what makes scenes dramatic is a character tell me what you think of this. This is Mamet. I don't know how much I agree with this. Mamet says, what makes a scene seem dramatic is a character trying to do something in every scene and failing / receiving information that then gets them to the next scene and the next goal and the next step towards achieving that goal. And sorry, last part. This is very important. When the character achieves his or her goal, the story ends. That's it.
So it's a video game.
Well, or is a video game a story?
A video game is a story,
Right.
Because you go from stage to stage until you get the final boss, and then your adventure is gone.
Correct. Yes, I think that's basically what Mamet is saying.
It's a video game.
Yeah. Mamet
Well,
would
I
probably
disagree.
really
I
chew you
disagree.
out
It
for
should
that.
be- yeah,
that
like,
description, knowing how I want to know about David Mamet.
It's one of the possibilities on how to write a story, but there are so many ways a character can advance his story.
Okay.
The character can advance the story without even the character being in the story. I'm going to give you an example.
Okay.
Laura.
I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago,
I know that reference. I know what you're
Ed Drew Baker wrote a full year of Captain America without Captain America in the book.
Yep.
Yes. Okay,
The story was advancing.
but the story's not. But the story wasn't
The
about
character
Captain
was
America.
gone.
Well, okay, there was another guy in the Captain America outfit.
But it was all about the Captain America mantle. And you realize that it was bigger than the character. The concept was bigger than the character. So at one point, what Mamet says has only its limits to a certain type of stories.
Right. Well, and we're right, because Captain America is episodic, not serialized. Ergo, if Captain America
That can be argued.
defeated all of the enemies and was like, I'm going to retire now, or, I'm now old, so after I put all the Infinity Stones back, I'm now going to go, go to the 40s and live out my life with, the 60s. I don't know when he went back to at the end of Endgame.
40s, yeah.
Well, he's really old, though.
Yeah, born in 1917.
Right, so I don't know where he went, but or did he just hang out as an old guy in 2020 or whenever that was, 2018, 2019?
Yeah.
Sorry, deep cut on the MCU there. Went down a bit of a rabbit hole there. But I don't think Mamet would say that you're necessarily challenging what he's saying. He would agree with you. He would just say that in that period of the comic, the main character was Bucky Barnes, not Steve Rogers.
Only for a few issues. But the thing is, what he says cannot be generalized and be like this rule. Like, it's one possibility. The beautiful things about writing is that you can create so many ways to narrate your story, to convey your action,
Right.
to have your character advance to the next stage, that it's just impossible to just put it in a box and say, hey, this is the rule.
Sure, but I'd say this is a really big box. I mean, it would be an interesting challenge to come up with a story that doesn't fit in that box. That's how big the box is. That's why I don't necessarily find it to be that's super useful. But I think if you're just starting out as a comics writer, you have to worry about space really instead of time, because movies deal with time, comics deal with space, right? The printed page, even if you're scrolling down it, if you're doing a webtoon on your phone and you're scrolling it, it's still the panel, right? You're still dealing with space. And sometimes constricting space, if you're just starting out, like the first thing, I worked for a company called Malibu Comics,
Oh yeah, remember those.
which some of you gray hairs here remember.
Did you?
I did. My first printed comic was Prime.
Oh, nice.
Prime.
And what's funny is I'm now working for my editor, Hank Kalans, who's my editor, now I'm working for him at another company. I first started, they made me do I just serialized this, I just wrote a backup story that ended up never getting published, but it was 8 pages. It was very helpful to my first professional comics job it's serialized, but it's 8 pages, which is like a third of the average length of an average floppy comic, and so sometimes I think constricting yourself when you're first starting out is actually a good thing. Because I find a lot of students get very flummoxed and kind of freaked out by the infinite possibilities of things. But nevertheless, I'm curious. Do you think I'm going to challenge you now, Fabrice? Do you think you can think of something that does not fit into Mamet's
I can
goal-oriented
and I will.
story?
I'm not sure I can by the end of this panel, but I
All right,
will.
fair enough.
But I just want to tell you something about story. You said 8 pages was your first assignment, right?
As a pro, yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask the audience, what do you think is the most complicated story to tell? Is it 20 pages, 100 pages, 8 pages, 16 pages,
6.
or 1 page?
1 page.
Who says what? You
1
said
page.
1 page?
Yeah.
Do we have other answers? 1 page. A 1-page story is the hardest thing to do.
Yep.
It should not be. Because if you think about it, every episode, every issue, or every graphic novel is structured to be as many stories of 1 page, patched together to create a whole story. And when we work with illustrators, and as an editor, I always say this, when you look at a page, it has to work without the balloons, without any text, and the narration should be clear enough so that you can understand the story of that page. So 1 page is 1 story. But as a writer, it's very difficult to write a page because you're tempted to overload it with so much stuff. And then your artist, and it happened to me on an Intertwine project. Intertwine is one of my creator-owned books. I submitted a 1-page story for an anthology that was supposed to help retailers coming back to business after COVID. And it was published. And so I had this 12-panel page.
Okay.
I sent it to the artist.
How many balloons on that page?
There, I don't remember how many balloons, but it was a 12-panel page, and it was an action scene that had a beginning, a middle, and an end on one page.
12 is a lot, you guys.
12 is a lot, like even by European standards. It's
Yes.
still a
Oh,
lot.
yeah.
But it was still breathable.
Okay.
Because there was action. I sent it to my artist. He said, "I don't want to read that. I don't care. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna draw whatever I want, and you're gonna come up with a story." So how to bring the challenge back to your court, and actually the one-page story that we did and that was published, I sent it to the editor. She had 0 notes, and she said, like, "Oh, that's very good, Fabrice. Like, how did you guys come up with this?" I said, like, "You will never believe it. But it was such a challenge. They took me 3 weeks to come up with the right tone and the right words to that one-page
To
story
manage the page.
that was made in reverse."
Yeah.
And so, to your point, in our universe, as comic book creators, we are also challenged by our co-creators, by the artists.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you are going to come up with a story that will fit the boxes that you are talking about, sometimes the artist will have another vision. And it will change, it will derail your narrative. It will
Sure.
completely change everything. I remember I was working on a book called One Hit Wonder with a massive talent called Ariel Olivetti. He's from Argentina. You don't tell anything to Ariel. You don't say no to Ariel, and Ariel doesn't take corrections well. So I sent him the script. What I got was 80% different from what I wrote. And I said, "Ariel, what it is?" And he said, "Do what you must. I'm not changing anything." And then you have to work with that.
Yeah.
So in television, I want to point that.
But
in
Fabrice, isn't that
television,
itself kind of a box?
it becomes a box. Oh, damn it. It becomes a box, but
It constrains you, right? You
A constraint.
You can't, you
I
can't
wanna
do that
talk-
to him, right?
Yes.
You can't just be like, "Nah, draw something else."
absolutely you can't
Yeah.
do that because he's a superstar and you're like just like this small.
And the
time
deadline's
writer.
tomorrow.
Well, the deadlines was it was coming up fast, but there's a lot of interference in creative writing and creative entertainment. Whether it's a studio in television or it's an editor or it's a company that has rules and you don't know the rules or you haven't cracked the code.
Yeah.
So when you get into this, the story advances, the character, like every showrunner or every editor or every publisher has its own set of rules. So you have to bend your creation, you have to bend your creativity. And even if you're working in a creator-owned space, you still have to abide by those rules.
Sure.
Because if you're smart, you hire an editor.
Yeah.
No, if you're smart, you hire an editor. You can't edit yourself.
I'm done.
And in any cases, you have to find the right tone for the public you want to seduce.
Sure. To entice. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. No, yeah, I agree with all that. I would just say I don't know that Mamet would disagree with any of that either.
Good.
You know,
I'm glad we could be friends with David Mamet.
I mean, you know, he's a little weird, but
He's divisive.
he is. So, again, bringing it back to this episodic serialized distinction and the slides. If you're dealing with an episodic series, even to see, you know, the easier the character's goal is to achieve, oftentimes the shorter the piece is going to be. Getting off, being stranded on a desert island, somehow stopping all crime or all bad things from happening, supervillains and so forth. The hero's goal should be open-ended and broad. So it's cops and robbers, interesting jobs, maintain a relationship, right? A lot of romance stories and sitcoms are based on that premise. Raising a family, as most soap operas.
Quest.
A quest, yes, exactly. Or it typically has to be a goal that is extremely difficult in and of itself. Like, for example, I become a monster when I get angry, and I'm big and green, and I smash things. I don't want to do that anymore. So you look for a cure, right? But
I bring balance to the force.
or I bring balance to the force,
How do
right?
you do that? How do you even know what the balance is?
Some of them are kind of specific. Like I'm trying to solve this mystery, right? There was a show and a movie series called The Fugitive that was about that. Walter White wants to become a wealthy drug kingpin. That's a very difficult task. Claim the throne of Westeros, right? That took many seasons.
In many heads.
And at the end, they just arbitrarily gave it to somebody. So, oh well, what are you gonna do? The chosen one, right? That's the bringing balance to the force, right? That's
Not
one of my
usually,
least
but
favorite story engines, but it's a very popular one in real life
Very Christian.
and in yeah. Destined to blah blah blah. Just destroy Voldemort, become the Hajar,
Destroy the
Bazarak.
Matrix.
Yeah, all that stuff. That's all chosen one narratives. That's a very, very popular story engine.
In the U.S.
Well, I mean, worldwide, I would say. Yes, in the U.S., but I mean, last I checked, that guy in the middle's very popular in many other places, in many other countries. All right, exactly. Yeah, the chosen one narrative is very big in manga and anime, 100%. What have I missed, Fabrice? It's everyone's favorite interview question. What haven't I asked you that you wish I asked you?
You're so brilliant.
I'm always like, I just want to get off the phone.
But we can ask the audience.
Yes.
If they have questions.
Yeah. Are there any questions? Sir?
If David Mamet were the showrunner for a Star Trek series,
Okay.
would he call it Glengarry Gene Roddenberry?
You were waiting this whole time.
I think he
Who are
came
you?
prepared. Like,
That's
probably
right.
thought about it last week.
Well, it's funny. This whole Mamet thing comes out of a. Is this thing connected to the internet?
It is, yeah.
Interesting. Let's have some fun, shall we?
He's edged down at the bottom.
And I, of course, am a Mac user, so. This is, what am I in? This is PDF. This is a PDF reader.
Yeah. See that? Yeah.
Ooh, the edge. Let's go to the edge. Is it cool if I open this?
Yes.
Do you know how to use Windows better than I do?
No.
Screw it.
I'm a hardcore Mac person. And the funny thing, like personal story, both my parents worked at IBM. So the first time I came up with a Mac, it was like,
You have to click on it yourself.
It's like putting pineapple on pizza.
yeah, that's against nature.
like a chimp. But yeah, if you could just get me the internet, that'd be awesome.
Sure.
Get me the internet. that would be Star Trek, right? Computer, give me internet.
It's coming.
So what's funny is about the showrunner thing is this David Mamet thing I've been talking about comes from he was a showrunner of a CBS show called The Unit. Does anyone remember The Unit, which is like a SEAL Team 6 type thing?
Millennium.
Yeah. What am I interested in? Is this like my browser? I can just type it and it'll search
You should
automatically
be
in
able
the
to. I'll
browser.
stand up just in case.
David Mamet email unit. So that whole shtick I was talking about was this. So basically, Mamet was dealing with this writer. So like a lot of people know how TV is made, right? You throw a bunch of writers in a room, and they come up with scripts and stories and the season. And there's a guy called the showrunner, typically, who's the head writer, often the guy who created the show. And so Mamet, in addition to being a playwright and a screenwriter, also was the head of the show. So they were dealing with producers like to give notes, right? The guys, money guys, give notes at the show, and quite often the producers' only, qualifications for giving notes is that they have money, which if you've ever met a rich person who's also dumb, you will also know that they're not necessarily qualified to be giving writer's notes. So instead he wrote this, so this is where it comes from. He wrote a all caps email. So it's David Mamet shouting writing tips at you. I'm not going to bother writing this, but if anyone has any interest in it at all, it's called a letter. I think this is /film is the site, which is where I always get it from. So the argument he was having was the writers are giving notes, like, let's talk about, like, it's a SEAL Team 6 show, right? So it's like, so everybody wants scenes like the SEAL Team 6 guys in a room being like, oh no, someone's going to assassinate the prime minister. How can we stop them from assassinating the prime minister, right? And they're just talking about stuff as opposed to doing things, People who don't understand how drama works think that if you... Also, the other thing producers and editors, not you, obviously, get very uptight about is they are always looking after the stupid readers. Right? They think
just like at
they think,
Marvel when you have to repeat the characters' names.
Yes, exactly. Hello, Spider-Man. Welcome to Avengers Mansion. I, Thor, welcome you. You know, like that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of that. So a lot of notes you're going to get from producers and editors is they're worried about dumb people. But no one is as dumb as the idealized dumb person in the name in their minds that they're trying to get you to write for.
Yeah.
And so we the writers, this is I'm not going to yell like David Mamet is clearly doing in this. Is we the writers would ask ourselves, have ever seen these three questions? So what do you think of this? Who wants what? What happens if she doesn't get it? And why now? And that's every scene. As a writer, you should be trying to answer these questions. I can see you desperately wanting to disagree with this. See the gears working.
I'm
just curious
because,
sure,
I know why he did this and why it was put in this situation, because he was working within a system that is designed for him to fail. But again, I will.
Why do you think it is designed for him to fail?
Simply because television obeys rules that have nothing to do with creativity. It's advertising. It's target audiences, focus groups. It's a lot of bullcrap, but nothing that is creative. That's why, for a very long time, HBO was like the safe haven for creators.
This is a CBS show, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The unit was on CBS.
But that proves my point.
Exactly.
Like, you're depending on advertisers' money to keep the show going. Whereas on the other systems, whether it's the streamers or cable, or what's left of cable, you have a budget, it's discussed beforehand, you follow a budget, if people are there, you renew. That's very simple.
Right.
And it's based on audience and audience levels rather than being on advertisements. But again, I will steer it back to comics because this is also a very important conversation.
Are we at a Comic-Con?
Are we at a comic festival? Yes, we are. But in comics, you sort of have the same thing between what used to be called mainstream comics, which originally had a lot of advertising. Not anymore.
True.
But there were for many years, there were ads, commercials, like on the back of our comics, inside the comics, sometimes with the characters themselves, because the brands would pay more to have Spider-Man eat a sneaker.
Right.
Or the cupcakes.
For example.
Yes.
So as long as comics were around, there always was advertisements. And there were like full departments at these companies selling ads to brands. Then it disappeared because we moved from a mass market to a niche market, starting with the 90s.
And did you ever have the thing where at some point, it drove me crazy and I complained to my editors about it, but they're like, they would like buy ads right before the last page. Like you'd be reading the comic and it'd be super dramatic, and then suddenly you'd be looking at Spider-Man toothbrushes.
Yeah. No, I never did that. Like I'm too young in this business for that.
Drove me crazy.
But yeah, so going back to what you were saying, it really depends on who you are going to be show running or writing for. And the company makes the difference. They're setting the rules. So I understand where he's coming from.
Right.
But it's only valid in a system that is a system where your final customer is the person who sells the ads to the brands.
Okay.
In comics and in graphic novels, we're so small. It's a very different thing. I think a lot of people don't realize that in comic books, you have a word that is very important, books. We're part of the publishing family. We're part of the books family. So as much as serialization goes, and it's the origin of our medium, right now, we're more than ever closer to books than we are to episodic TV. And the dominant model is that.
Right.
Now, you have exceptions. Look at Webtoons, for example. Webtoons is a very good example because Webtoon runs on ads.
How many of you guys know Webtoon? Yeah.
So Webtoon, if you're a creator, you can go on forever, but at your own cost, or you can benefit from that ad money, can get revenue from ads, or be based on your audience, on your viewership, and based on how much ads are flowing through your comic. Yes?
Just might like to make a small correction. Most webtoon series are free to go on as long as they want.
No,
There are
yeah.
a few like unpopular series that their editors
They're dropped,
push
yes.
them to finish the story. As
Yeah.
quickly as
No, I know.
possible
I've
so
heard of
they'll
those.
go off
Yeah. I've heard of it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But like, don't start me on Webtoon, or we can have a 3-hour conversation on why I'm not a fan of their system.
Same.
That's the next panel.
But that's
Webtoon.
We can do
Why?
it next year. But clearly, creativity works better without interference, with those kind of interference. So, and clearly, David Mamet was a far better filmmaker and screenwriter when it was not bound by these. Now, in movies, the budget is everything.
Sure. Well, TV too.
In TV too,
Yeah.
which is not the case in comics.
Sure.
You can
Well,
write and draw a comic with much less budget.
sure, but you still have a budget.
Of course, you have to have a budget, except if the creators are doing it on the back end, which means that they invest all their time, takes the time it needs to take,
Sure.
and then they get their revenue when the book is published, but it's done. And fortunately or unfortunately, most of the graphic novels that are coming out right now are on that model. Because unfortunately, comic book companies and publishers don't have the money to advance a lot of money up front.
Sure.
And I'm talking like, because this is my case, like, it's very hard to say, okay, we're gonna pay up front all the costs, and then we're gonna wait, and then we're gonna give you royalties. The reality is that the market is not sustainable. That's why your cooperation with television, it is great. I love it. But in today's comic market, there's only so much that we can convey to this reality.
Sure. I hear you. I would just say that I think the rules of drama, in as much as you want to call them rules, are just story rules and don't really have much to do with the medium one way or the other.
But it impacts him, apparently.
Well, clearly he's trying to beat something into the heads of his writers in his writer's room. I also like at the very end he says, this is something you were saying, Fabrice, he says, if you pretend the characters can't speak and write a silent movie, you'll be writing a great drama. Like, he's basically agreeing with you on that respect, 100%. Can I get the PDF back?
Yes.
Computer. Open FRED slides. My AI here will take care of it for me.
That's David. Gold David AI.
That's right.
Right.
Nice.
There it is.
There you go. There's the big J.
All
big
right.
JC. Cool.
To my
JC superstar. At Gershak. What's the dude's name?
Was it Hadara?
Yes. Yeah, Gesundheit. Cool. So, we're any other questions as we near the hour mark?
curious, we're
Yes.
thinking of like action philosophers with nonfiction.
Yes.
Where does that kind of fit in within
Excellent question.
these kind of story engines?
So, Action Philosophers is a comic I've been doing for a long time. Since like 2000. Yeah, we're now in our 21st year of producing new Action Philosophers material. But that's a story about the lives and thoughts of history's A-list brain tusk told in a hip and humorous comic fashion. How many times have I said that this weekend? And so with nonfiction, a lot of times writers use various ploys. One of my least favorite is like, if you've ever read a book where a reporter or a journalist or a historian narrates their own pursuit of the material, like, I walk into the library, like, so there's a lot of that, so that's how they impose narrative structures and sort of MacGuffins on that, right? But the way I structure the Action Philosophers is a lot of ways, like, I'm trying to think of a good example. The MacGuffin ends up being the eventual thought that the philosopher came up with, right? Or what they're primarily known for. Like, Ayn Rand, just to take the first obvious example that popped into my head, who's a sort of libertarian right-wing philosopher, she grew up under in the Soviet Union, and so her sort of hyper-capitalistic views were formed by, she lived through the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviets seizing her father's pharmacy, and then it kind of ended up driving her to, you know, the complete opposite of the Soviet Union, which is Hollywood, and she became a script doctor and a screenwriter, and that's sort of where she, if you can imagine going from hardcore communism to Hollywood, what that would do to a person's brain and their way of thinking, you understand a lot of where Ayn Rand is coming from. And I don't particularly like Ayn Rand's philosophy. I find it to be excessively right-wing. But when you end up telling stories like this, when you look at a person as a person, you end up feeling for her and her struggle, and so you generate empathy, you know. And that's just a byproduct of telling somebody's story.
What about the opposite side, like 1984?
You mean what?
Like
How did Orwell come up with that?
Yeah, like when Orwell came up with them, like that, like philosophical aspect of that.
I'm not an Orwell expert, but I think that I know that he was very much influenced by what he was seeing when his experiences in the Spanish Civil War, and he was certainly involved in a lot of the socialist movements early on in Britain. So I think that he sort of extrapolated from that. I think his primary concern was seeing the fascist movements and the totalitarian movements that were dominating Europe in the early 20th century, and he wanted to satirize that. And he saw a lot of that creeping in places like England.
The Cold War.
Well, the Cold War had just started, right? Literally a couple of years before the book was published.
Before, yeah.
So he just saw it as a continuation, I think, also of those conflicts in World War II. And I think he was also frightened by the fact that, England was bombed to heck while Europe was at the end of World War II. And I think he was also worried about the seductive aspect of totalitarianism and just giving your thoughts and opinions over to some thought leader.
Nazi Germany was so fresh.
Yeah, and it just had just been defeated. Yeah. And I believe the title comes from the fact that the book was published in 1948. He just inverted the last two numbers in the year. So, which is good stuff. Great question. Anybody else? Cool. So, this is sort of more of a hardcore kind of creative writing 101 exercise, but I recommend when folks come up with a story engine, the first thing they should do is to turn the story engine on in your brain off. A lot of times your brain, I know it's weird for a teacher to tell you to not think, but I kind of feel like that a lot of times your brain gets in the way of itself. We also, the other aspect of this when you're first starting out, what I like to tell my students is you need to give yourself the freedom to suck, because you are. And you just are when you're first starting out. That's part of being a beginner, and you shouldn't be self-conscious about it, and you shouldn't beat yourself up for it and have anxiety about it. Instead, you should just let yourself be. So what I like to do is I say, come up with a story engine, try and articulate it in the couple words that, even it's as simple as the Star Trek opening, these are the voyages, blah, blah, blah. And then just sit down with a piece of paper or a computer or your phone and just jot down notes about how many different ideas you can come up with that follow that story engine,
Or you can hire an editor.
Well, what if you don't need money? What if you're a student,
You have friends. They can be your editor, non-paid.
Sure, but don't, what I'm saying is that's later. I'm saying you need to start with yourself in a room,
No,
period.
just say when you start your story engine.
Right.
Choosing the time when you're going to challenge your own creation, whether it's yourself or a third party.
Sure.
It can be whenever you choose to.
Correct. But I would say you need something to challenge first, though. You need the raw material.
You need
So this is specifically generating the raw material. So I'm not disagreeing with you fundamentally. I'm just saying, again, we're crawling, then we walk, and then we run.
I actually used to write log lines for the TV section at the time I was running.
Oh, wow.
It was the most soul-sucking job I've ever had.
I bet.
But aside from that, there was a recent challenge on Facebook about write a 5-word Star Trek plot.
Okay.
And I came up.
And did you do your David Mamet thing?
No, I did not. Good. I suggested Kirk slept with Picard's grandmother.
Who? What?
Kirk slept with Picard's grandmother.
All right.
And then you would
All right.
and then everybody supplied their own 5-word
Right.
plot. But it would be kind of this exercise.
Sure. And you don't have to do just 5 words.
Right.
I want
More
to
time
live in
travel.
Trekker's Paradise.
What?
I want to live in Trekker's Paradise.
It depends on when in the Trucker's Paradise.
Oh my gosh.
Are we talking about 2076?
Let's
That's
not
good.
be specific.
Okay.
Not during the Dominion War.
Right.
When it came to stories that now, I think stories now are trying to satirize certain aspects. I think Invincible, even Marvel films, but those are action movies. But I think now there are more satirization of these writing tropes. Is that
Great.
something that now you need a little bit more self-awareness of how the writing material is gonna go if you don't want it to be too tropey?
It's a good question. I think that kind of stuff kind of goes like this, right? Don't think it ever I always think of vampires. Whenever a new vampire thing comes up, people vampires are back. I'm like, where did they go? What are you talking about? Or zombies, right? Exactly. Zombies never went. Since Night of the Living Dead, zombies have not really gone anywhere.
But you were talking about tropes. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
What you said.
Yeah.
Robert Kirkman loves playing with this. And Invincible, he's you think you're going to get in for the tropes, and then he's very much amused playing with those up to the point where it makes no sense. And it's slapstick comedy. There's so much violence in Invincible that it's laughable.
Yeah.
And it brings a lot of relief, even though you feel for those characters when they die or where they're cut in a million pieces and all. And even in Walking Dead, I remember...
Or The Boys is another good example of
The Boys,
a
exactly.
hyper-violent
Absolutely.
superhero show.
But in The Walking Dead, Kirkman said that he was never interested in zombies. He only was interested in the soap opera nature of the book. And that's why he was okay, I'm going to do 190 plus issues and then I'm gone. Because I did what I wanted. I said what I wanted to say, and the characters, I have nothing else for them. But he was never interested in the zombies. The zombies are part of the background.
Yeah, he called it a George Romero movie that never ended.
Exactly.
Which is, the definition of a story.
But I really actually like this. It's actually one of my favorite things when I'm a writer is I get into the concept and I start my story engine with what you said, I choose my concept.
Thesis.
Exactly, my thesis. And then I play with it and I add elements which are baked at the center of it. So when you get to those, you have a completely different perspective on the whole story. And you realize that you approached it under a magnifying glass and everything was bigger than you thought. And that's also another way of making your story constantly fresh because you approach it from a very tiny perspective. And then when you zoom out, you have so much going on that you did not realize before. But for that, you need to have your world building, which is a word that you haven't pronounced yet.
Correct. I've not gotten to word building yet.
Which is very important because you need to know the constraints of the world that you created. Where does it stop? Where does it end? So yeah, very good.
Very much so. And this is the prize for sitting through this entire thing is this checkout code for my domestic class.
Everyone was
Nice.
for that.
I know. And
Even me.
take as many. Take the photo. Take the photo if you want. It's good for the next month, I think.
Cool.
So it's like 3 hours of your life. You'll enjoy it, I swear.
This one is unrelated, but what's this statement about in relation to comic books, movie fatigue relating to that, the Marvel fatigue?
It's always also working in comics.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Marvel fatigue.
So the comic fatigue, how did that become more pronounced? What made that into a legitimate topic?
Well, I mean, the history of mass media and to a certain extent capitalism involves people running into trends and then everyone tries to run in at the same time. They overproduce and then the whole thing collapses. And
I
then
have a
just
different
rebuilding
answer.
it.
I have a different answer, which is kind of
Adjacent?
adjacent to yours.
Sure.
When people come to my table and ask me why I'm not working for Marvel anymore, I said to them,
because we're not in the same business. Marvel, DC, all these company that owns brands, they're in the business of brands. Their goal is to perpetuate these brands through production of comic books. Our goal is to tell stories. It's a very different goal.
And usually in the case, it's like,
Does it smell gas?
It smells like something.
outside.
It smells really good to me.
It does smell gas.
It's Joker level.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't smell like it. I think we're sitting near electronics for too long. That's my
But
guess.
yeah, going back onto that, what about, so you're right, like that they want to perpetuate brands. When you're trying to work for an independent company studio, like say Image Comics, I think?
Image is not a company. It's a cooperative.
Oh,
It's a collection of 6 studios that are more or less independent.
so I guess like it is very hard for like you to find independent work unless if you're,
I don't know, I have my own company, so I give myself work.
that's fair.
You can't fire yourself, or maybe you.
I can, yeah. I actually do when I'm not the most qualified person for the job.
Cool.
Is Image? I mean, I feel like Image is kind of a weird situation because you have the few studios that have their little brands.
You have 6
but then
partners.
but then you have individual
but
creators.
There is a central image that is not affiliated with
Image
Studios.
Central,
Yeah, okay.
which had the partner that corresponds to that is Eric Stevenson. And Image Central is free to welcome
Right.
whoever they deem worthy
Right.
of being published through
Yes. Yeah.
the I brand.
Okay.
One person, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
one
Yeah,
person,
one
yes.
person make that
doesn't
calls
respond
the
to-
shot. It's Eric.
Who doesn't respond to emails? Yeah.
Throw me back. To reject my book, but he wrote me back.
Okay.
But this has been awesome. We have less than a minute. Any final
A
thoughts?
real quick one.
Yes, sure.
So if you're giving advice to someone just starting off in comics, writing, drawing, whatever, what length would their first sort of comic be? Would you say a couple of pages, 8 pages, or a whole ongoing series?
So again, I'm not hard selling the class, but in the class, it's 8 pages. And I think primarily because, as I was telling the story before, that's how I started. So that's what I'm sort of familiar with. But yeah, 8 pages is a nice length. You can have a solid story, beginning, middle, and end. Commercially, it's not the greatest because you'll have to find an anthology to put it in.
Yeah, but actually, this is a good time for anthologies.
That is true with
Because
Kickstarter. Yeah.
with Kickstarter, there are a lot of anthologies, and there's a lot of calls
Yeah.
for authors and writers and artists for anthologies. So if you find the right people on Kickstarter and you like track them down and you find a spot on these anthologies, you not only have something that is published, but you also something that will help you understand better the whole nature of our business.
Yeah, short stories. Don't do what I did, which is try to do a 12-issue maxi series.
Interesting.
It's your first thing. And then
Well, my
before
first
it
thing
comes out-
was a
Ambitious.
4-issue miniseries. So.
well, that's how many. I should have done that because I actually got to 4 issues. and the
Well,
whole
you know
thing
what? The
collapsed.
thing is because of you. Because when you did X-Men Noir,
Okay. No, you did Spider-Man Noir first. Though Spider-Man Noir predates X-Men Noir.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but our budget was cut down.
Really?
It was supposed to be 5 issues.
Okay.
It was cut down to 4
Okay. Why? Because they made us do 4?
because they decided that everyone should be 4.
That was ridiculous because every issue sold out. So I don't know what they were thinking, but because we both did sequels. I think ours were the only series that got sequels.
Yes.
Should have been 5.
Should have been
would have
5.
made my life a lot easier. I did a murder mystery with like 700 characters. It would have made my life a lot easier if I had 5
We had to
issues.
cut Dave Hine and I. We had to cut entire storylines because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. I think we did it's gone. Thank you. Both of you stayed the whole time. God bless you.